I woke up from a strange dream. In the dream, I was floating on a raft all alone in the ocean. I looked at my clock as it struck 7 o'clock in the evening. I was never much of an early evening napper until recently. I think it's safe to say that it has everything to do with that damn book. I admit I loved my gifts. New skills, technological, a gift of thunder, and music. What else awaited me? It had been a few days since the incident with the clowns, and I was secretly hoping that nothing else from the book seeped into my reality. I sat up as my telephone rang. Looking at the caller ID, I recognized it was my friend Julia.
Robert, how are you?
Very well. How have you been?
Oh, I think I caught some flu while I was in Brazil.
Brazil?
I laughed.
Yes, I made it to South America. I'm in Miami now. I'm resting in a posh hotel. So, anything new?
She asked in her deep southern way.
Oh, I recently took up the piano.
How very intellectual of you.
I know. Who would have thought you can teach an old dog new tricks?
Are you sure that is the only reason?
What other reason could there be, except the capacity to learn?
Did you put anything in that book yet?
She asked me seriously.
What do you mean?
Did you write anything down?
Not exactly.
She snickered into the phone.
Robert, the keeper of secrets. Listen, I'll be in town to see you by the end of next week. There is something vital I want to discuss with you.
Of course. I'm looking forward to seeing you.
With that, I hung up the phone. Suddenly, I heard a loud knocking sound. It sounded as though someone was beating a steel drum as loudly as they could. I looked around my living room. You would think that after all that I had been through, I would be used to strange sounds by now. However, it never ceased to perplex me. I saw a dim light coming from my bookshelf. The sound became louder as I got closer to it. The Read Me book jumped off the shelf and plummeted itself into my chest, nearly knocking me over.
Hell.
I yelled. I rubbed my chest as it was quite sore from the blow. I sat on my sofa and placed the book on my lap, and it opened up to me. Pages flipped past 100 times, finally settling on a blank page that began to come to life. It was a large brick building with black windows. The old building was sprawled out in the middle of a small town and seemed to tower above the residents like the angel of death. There was a field surrounding it, and I could make out the words on the building's front. Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. I saw the chapter illuminate on the page in a bright, fiery light. I was the youngest resident of the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. I read on out loud to myself as my voice changed into that of a young child. The year, 1932. It was a perfect fall day on the day that I was born. I was a perfect baby, 10 fingers, 10 toes, all in place. 6 pounds and 5 ounces of gorgeous, preserved baby boy. The circumstances to which I was born were not perfect, however. My mother was placed in the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum by my father. He claimed that she had been challenging to live with because of the bouts of melancholy. He claimed she barely talked to him anymore and continuously made life difficult when he would take her out in public. She would act strangely, pretending not to know him, or pretend that she was other people. It was all lies, of course. My father had been having an affair with his secretary, and he didn't want a wife or a child to come between him and his mistress. I was allowed to stay with my mother for the first few weeks at the asylum, but then I had to be put in a ward where I would have 24-hour care. I was the first child to have been born at the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. There were other children, but they were pubescent. Most were wards of the state of West Virginia, which meant that they were taken care of financially for the rest of their lives, regardless of age or social status. Instead, I was cared for by multiple staff and a few patients that were good with children. One such woman, whom I had considered my true mother after mine unfortunately hung herself with the twisted bed linens, she was found hanging from the rafters in the laundry room, Izzy took to me immediately. They said she had children of hers years before me, but her husband took them and moved away. She was committed and never saw them again. What can I say about Izzy? Her first name is Isabel. Last name is nearly forgotten except for one time she shared it with me. It was Martin. Isabel Martin had become a number 852314 by the hospital records. The staff treated all the patients as though they were items or things to be studied. The newest medication, some off-the-wall concoction, was given to the patient that best fit the worst symptoms. Most were barbaric by later standards of practice. Izzy kept to herself when she wasn't required to have meals other than the woman in her ward. She helped care for me each day, changing my diapers and combing my baby fine hair. And when I was older, she taught me manners such as how to eat with a fork, cut with a knife, and not slurp my soup like a slob. They built a playground that had to be fenced in so the criminally insane patients could not get in and cause damage to it. It consisted of a few secondhand swing sets that were handed down from the local elementary school after putting in a brand new one. It also had a small slide and an area to play hopscotch. It was okay for the most part, but being the only child under 10 years of age proved to be rather lonely. I had my room filled with old toys, dolls, and a tiny bed for my slim frame to sleep in. No matter what, I always had Izzy, so she would play with me on the swing and indulge my constant enthusiasm for army guys. One afternoon, something changed. We had a new head nurse in charge of the ward that I was in by Mrs. Whitehead's name. She was a stern advocate for cost saving at the facility, so more patients had to be admitted. Seeing as how I was the only child under 6, I was placed in a new room 8 by 10. I was only allowed to take one doll with me, so I took my little toy soldier named Captain Ryan. My room was at the end of a long hallway that was gloomy at best. There was a lock placed on the outside of my door. It wasn't so I wouldn't escape. No one else except for the hospital staff could get in. Long before they added the building to the lobotomy ward, the criminally insane ward, and the ward for drug addicts, it was common practice to place you where they had space for you. It was how my nightmare began. I was never placed for adoption, even though I was a ward of the state. Instead, I was kept at the hospital. I had teachers that taught me what I needed, and later I did attend regular school. But for the first 10 years of my life, I remained inside the walls of Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. My first night of the new quarters was quiet. The second night, that is when the horror began. I woke up in the middle of the night to a whispering coming from outside my metal door.
I see you.
I could not see him. It was most surely a man's voice, but in the dark. It was very, very dark at night, except for the nurse's station, which had a little dim lamp on the desk where the nurse in charge sat in the middle of the hall to keep an eye on patients. "Who's there?" I answered, putting Captain Ryan at the foot of my bed, waiting on him to charge on whoever was at my door.
A demon.
"Mr. Andrews!" I heard the head nurse charging down the hallway. "Please return to your room."
I want to see the new pet.
He stammered. "How on earth did you get out?"
Dead man did it.
He cackled. I was growing terrified. "Enough nonsense. Now go lay down and I will fetch your favorite pillow," she said in a mocking kind of voice. I heard the door next to mine slam and the jangling of keys. Then I heard her walk away back down the hallway. I had a hard time sleeping after that. As time wore on, I began to get used to my neighbor's antics and realized that he was relatively harmless. There were others. However, I learned to avoid that in the long hallway. There was a man named Big Red. He was a tall man who later discovered was a boxer. He had killed 3 men in a bar fight one night. All night, every night since his admittance, I would hear him hitting the steel door over and over again. It never seemed to cease except for when it was taken out for school, bath time, or for meals. All night, the banging never ended. Mr. Andrews began to yell one night over the banging. He cursed, and said things I would never imagine anyone that was God-fearing would say. He had grown much more agitated as time went on. Big Red continued his assault on the metal doors as though he was a caged animal. He usually ignored me after the first night when he saw me. He wasn't protective exactly, but would tell other patients that his pet had to sleep. It creeped me out at the time, but I think Mr. Andrews took a liking to me in this way. I was no longer afraid of him. Izzy came to get me one afternoon for a cooking lesson. I recall it was close to the holidays coming up. She had obtained permission from one of the nurses to teach me how to bake sugar cookies with her. I helped her and two of the other nurses who joined as we rolled out the dough and shaped it into little star cutouts that she had given me. We had decided to make a few dozen for the other patients, and in doing so, I had an unfortunate accident. I had seen Izzy taking the tray of cookies with a giant rag, but not realizing that the oven was hot. I tried to help after the second batch. I opened the stove myself before anyone could stop me, grabbing the hot tray with my hands. I held it for far too long before realizing the absolute horrifying pain and dropping the scalding tray of cookies on the kitchen floor. I screamed bloody murder. I cried so loud that both nurses and Izzy rushed to my aid to help me. I wouldn't stop crying no matter what they did to help me with my pain. My hands were both burnt very severely. My skin was coming off, and to this day, I don't know what possessed me to hold onto that tray as long as I did. It was like I didn't know what heat or pain was. I was bandaged, sedated, and put into bed. Mr. Andrews saw me in my bandages, and he got very agitated.
My pet! Who hurt my pet?
Mr. Andrews, calm down or we will have to shut your door,
said one of the nurses. Greta, perhaps you should anyhow. He's had enough downtime today.
I will get him to bed.
But the nurse didn't have time. Instead, Mr. Andrews followed the two nurses to my door and saw Izzy crying. It's my fault. I'm so sorry. Mr. Andrews lurched forward, unexpectedly hitting Izzy in the head as hard as he could, knocking her into the wall of my room. Izzy was unconscious, and Mr. Andrews was screaming.
My pet! My pet!
It took 2 nurses, 3 orderlies, and 1 doctor to sedate Mr. Andrews. That was the last time I saw Izzy. I didn't know what happened to her, if she was alive, dead, or in a coma. I was reading the words on the page when I heard a knock at my door. I snapped out of my storytelling mode. I sat the read-me book on the coffee table and went to answer the door.
Hello, are you Robert Zephyr?
An older man stood at my door. He was tall, wore a black raincoat, and had a black fedora.
Yes. Who wants to know?
My name is Edmund. I have come to speak with you about a crucial matter.
I opened my door, letting the older man in.
Please, sit down.
I said.
Thank you. This won't take long.
Very well. Could I offer you a drink?
Oh, a cup of coffee if you have one. It is quite a chilly day.
The old man smiled.
Of course.
I said, making my way into the kitchen to fix a pot of coffee.
So, tell me, Mr. Zephyr, how long have you known Julia Spellman?
Years. Julia was a colleague of mine when I did theater.
I yelled from the kitchen.
I believe she is acquainted with a very good friend of mine.
Oh.
I finally asked, seeing the pot of coffee rush through making a quick pot. I had only put together enough for 2 cups. No point in wasting an entire pot of coffee for some stranger who was only staying for a few minutes.
Yes, Isabel Martin.
I froze. What the hell? I quietly grabbed the cups of coffee and took them into my living room. Edmund Wright was sitting up tall with a pleasant grin on his face.
I'm afraid I have no idea about Julia's other friendships. I'm not sure I know how to help.
I figured that might be the case.
He said, sipping the coffee and sitting back against the couch.
I think she may be in danger, if I may be so blunt.
Danger?
I asked, puzzled.
Yes, she took something of value to a very close friend of mine.
What did she take?
I could not imagine Julia as a thief, but she had said that she wanted to talk to me about something vital. I kept that to myself.
It was an item that was sold to her. You see, a very grave mistake was made. She was sold something that was not for sale. I was wondering if I may get in contact with her. Some very dangerous people are looking for her now.
I could pass a message, but I don't see her often, however.
I lied in an attempt to protect my friend in case she was in danger. This man knew something. I thought it was bizarre. He mentioned the name of the woman from the Read Me story. This was becoming all too surreal.
Thank you very much.
Edmund stood, handing me his coffee cup.
Is there a way to contact you?
I asked.
She will know. Tell her my name. Thank you for the coffee, and I'm so sorry I came to you with this grave message. Please, forgive the intrusion.
With that, I let Edmund write out of my house. I tried to call Julia on my cell phone, but all I got was her voicemail. I walked over to the sofa and sat down. I looked at the coffee table where I had left the book. It was now gone.